Exocet update January 25th, 2024. Using a floor jack and engine hoist, we supported the front and rear subframe on dollies using stacks of wood. With the entire powertrain supported this way, we were able to remove the shocks. The Exocet frame is light enough that it can be picked up by 4 people and placed onto the subframes where the fasteners could be installed. There is a specific order that you want to install the fasteners in, which I'll talk about next. On the Miata subframe, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 bolt holes. So 8 total on the front. On the rear, 1, 2, 3. So 6 total on the rear. The Exocet frame only uses 4, so they don't use the fastener right here. Now on the chassis, all of these holes are the same size, and they're located very accurately. If I put a bolt in, that's pretty much the same fitment in all of these holes. On the subframe, not all of these holes are sized the same. You can clearly see here, the hole right there is smaller than the hole right here. So if I put the fastener in, it's a tight fit. Over here, it's a loose fit. So this hole right here positions the entire subframe. And then to constrain the rotation degree of freedom, the opposite hole is slotted. So you can see it's tight up and down, but it's slotted left and right. So a lot of left-right movement, but not forward-backward. Those 2 holes position the entire subframe. So you can clearly see, put that in, tight, loose, loose, loose. The rear subframe is designed the same way. So you can clearly see right here, that hole slotted, that hole's oversized, that hole's small, that hole's oversized. So this hole right here sets the position of the frame. The slot on the opposite side constrains the rotation, and then all the other bolt holes are just there so you have enough fasteners in the joint to clamp everything together. Nice and tight. Nice and loose. Loose left and right, tight front to back, loose. So when we go to put this together, we want to start with this position here, move on to the slot on the other side, and then in theory, all the other bolts should just fall into place without too much finagling of the frame and subframe. And the same goes for the rear. Start with the tight hole here, then the slot, and then the other 2 oversized holes on the back should just line up, no issue whatsoever. We'll see how that goes when we actually put the frame onto the subframes and powertrain. This hole design is done in manufacturing just for ease of mass manufacture and assembly. The hole right here, once I get the fastener in through this, and on the opposite side, the frame is completely constrained. All the other holes can be oversized because they're just part of the bolted joint that clamps the frame to the chassis. They're not doing anything for position, they're just clamping. And to make all the holes tight to the bolt would increase scrap costs in manufacturing more than likely, and just in general make assembly difficult. If there's any kind of misalignment, You may not have all fasteners pass through. The Exocet frame is light enough that 4 people can pretty easily pick it up. It really wasn't a lot of effort for us to pick it up, carry it over, and drop it down. Unfortunately, we did have some interference between fuel lines and the battery wiring harness that ran along the power plant frame. We ended up having to lift the frame off more than once to adjust the lines and remove the wiring harness from the power plant frame so we could get the right clearance. The power plant frame near the nose of the diff is really close to the inside of the transmission tunnel on the Exocet frame. We used the engine hoist to pick up the rear because the frame was actually dropping down onto the wood that we were holding the rear subframe with, and we had to adjust our wood placement to get enough clearance where the frame could drop down onto the subframe. Overall, this process was relatively painless. We installed the fasteners in the hole positions as I had highlighted earlier. The rear subframe, there were no issues. All 4 bolts dropped in easily with this method. The front subframe, not so much. The slot hole was very misaligned. The front and rear subframe don't want to sit level to each other. We knew that the front subframe was kind of sitting at a bit of an angle compared to the Exocet frame. This is what I attribute the misalignment to. We brainstormed a couple different ideas of how to get the driver's side of the frame to line up. We ended up using some forceful coaxing to align the holes.
Oh, you're almost there, you're almost there. Oh, it's like we need a little bit more,
I can push the other side, but that's about, I feel like this front left corner of the car is
Sam, put your foot down there, Dad, you're in a hole.
Okay, ready?
Nope. We're tipping the car. Yeah, I know.
With the car jacked up on the lower A-arm mount and 2 people deflecting the suspension and pulling, along with a pry bar, we were able to get the bolt in place. Once the subframe slot bolt was put into place, all other fasteners aligned and dropped into place with no issue. The subframe didn't quite sit level to the Exocet frame. It's not correct to use the nut tightening to lift the frame into place, but there was very little resistance as we did it, so we were not concerned about stripping the thread. We tightened everything snug with ratchets, and then we used a torque wrench to go around first to 70 pound-feet and then to 90 pound-feet. We used standard M12 nuts that we will replace with the Exocet supplied lock nuts later. Without any bodywork in the way, installing the shock was relatively simple. One person pressed down on the suspension and the other installed the shock. On a standard Miata, it's necessary to disassemble the control arms to install the shock. This required relatively little effort, although upon reviewing the video, it may be easier if the sway bar is disconnected. If the Exocet supplied shock spacers are used, this method may not work. Unfortunately, on the front, the top of the strut interfered with the tube frame and was not able to seat properly. We will have to get the Exocet supplied shock spacers to properly install the suspension. There was no issue in the rear. However, when we put the wheels on the car, we believe that there will be interference between the tire and the frame at full suspension jounce. Here you can more clearly see the tight clearance on the passenger side of the car through the transmission tunnel. Where the power plant frame mounts to the nose of the diff at the rear of the car, there is very tight clearance between the side of the transmission tunnel and the power plant frame. We will have to reroute the wiring harness in this area.